Hello, I'm Neil Spooner, the chair of the Patient-Centric Sampling Interest Group, and welcome to our latest webinar. The theme today is Expanding Zip Codes, a novel approach to reaching and engaging clinical trial participants across the United States. And I'd like to welcome your presenters today, Carissa Jones from Ventus, Bill Ains from Eli Lilly, and Gerald Finken from RxE2. Welcome all of you. And thank you all of you online for attending. I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors, the sponsors of PCSIG, who fund our organization and fund all of these webinars and enable us to provide them to you for free. Just remind you that this webinar is being recorded and in the next few days will be available on our YouTube channel. We very much look forward to taking part in a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Please use the chat function to submit your questions and we'll deal with those at the end. So with no further ado, I'd like to move on to our first presenter, which is Carissa. All over to you, Carissa. See you on the other side.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here today. And thank you to the audience for your attendance. So I'm going to kick this off with a little bit about the state of the healthcare system in the US. So first off, a stat that you may know or may surprise you a little bit is 90% of the annual healthcare expenditures in the US, which equals about $4.1 trillion, is related to treating chronic disease and mental health. And to take that a bit further, that 90% is usually related to hospital expenditures. There are many adults in the US with chronic conditions. I think the real take home here is the percentage. So if you look at 2030, 63.5% of Americans, adult Americans, will have chronic conditions. That's one or more chronic conditions. And that number goes up a slight bit by 2050. But think about it, that's still roughly 2/3 of the American population that suffers from a chronic condition. In terms of obesity in the US, this is a graph that shows national numbers, but also by region. So if you look here between 2011 and 2022, you see a huge increase in the prevalence of obesity in the US, and especially in the South. That's one of the more hard-hit regions by obesity. But you can definitely see that over the entire US, there has been a dramatic increase in the prevalence of obesity in the last 15 years. This is a map you love but also hate, because what this map is showing you is the prevalence of chronic disease as it is across the entire US. And anything in red is what we consider a hot spot, with 99% confidence that that is a very, very high area with chronic disease. You'll notice that a lot of the red on this map is associated with southern regions within the US. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is socioeconomic disadvantages of the individuals living in those regions, but also access to healthcare. You know, many of these individuals might live somewhere where it's nearly impossible to reach a healthcare site, whether that be emergency care or even just a primary care physician. This is unfortunately the state of things, and basically, I want to talk about how that connects to expanding zip codes. So how do these chronic conditions relate to clinical trials? So this is a quote from someone within the National Academic of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine report in May of 2022. And it basically says, while US investments in clinical research have contributed significantly to treating and preventing disease and extending human life, there's large amounts of the population that are not able to benefit from those discoveries. They're not adequately represented in clinical studies. And as we mentioned just a moment ago, a lot of the southern region of the United States, they have socioeconomic disadvantages or maybe just not access to healthcare. So if they're not reaching healthcare, they're also not reaching clinical trials. I didn't state it here, but there are some statistics that tell us that 1 in 3 individuals a new therapeutic works for. So that means 2 out of every 3 people that try a drug do not reach the desired efficacy for that drug. So basically, at the end of this quote, as the US becomes more diverse every day, failing to reach these growing communities will only prove more harmful and costly over time. So expanding zip codes can address this chronic disease burden we have in the US a few different ways. If you can expand the individuals that are in these clinical trials, you represent a more real world patient population. You don't have a skewed population where a drug works in 1 in 3 people. You have a population that is more representative of the real world. Therefore, you have a better chance of reaching efficacy and improving the quality of life and healthcare burden in the US. The second point is, again, these drugs are more effective. There's no longer a one size fits all treatment plan. And I'm not sure how many of you follow investors and how money flows into biotech, pharma, and in that particular sector, but they love a precision medicine approach. They definitely love when something can very much be catered to an individual and improve that individual's health. And that's exactly what you do. When you get more people into the trial, you can reach a more effectiveness of the particular therapeutic, and you're no longer a one size fits all treatment plan. The last point here involves trust, and this one's a little bit difficult to always measure. And I think you're going to hear more about this from Gerald later on in the presentation. But one of the things, and it's especially prevalent in that Southeast region, is there's a lack of trust in the medical system. Thereby, there's a lack of trust in the clinical trial system. And if you can involve people, you can help drugs work better in people, then you will instill trust in that medical system. And that's really key here. So hopefully I've set the stage a bit on what the current healthcare situation is in the US. So thank you for listening. And now I'm going to hand it over to Bill Ains from Eli Lilly.
Thank you for the introduction, Carissa. So I'm here to talk about how Eli Lilly is expanding zip codes and reaching people where they are at. And as Carissa said, it's important to reach people where they're at and in comfortable settings so that they trust the medicine that they're taking. So one way we're doing this is by broadening patient access through various Lilly initiatives. We are engaging in community-based screening events. We not too long ago had the 99 campaign, which was early breast cancer detection, where we provided free mammograms to those in attendance. Another way we're doing this is by spinning up mobile labs, which can provide on-site health services and also facilitate trial recruitment for underserved populations or geographically constrained individuals. Another way we're doing this is through e-services like a telehealth platform where we offer virtual consultations. Another initiative is at-home delivery of medications. And of course, we have plenty of educational resources out on the web for patients or potential patients to peruse. And then also, decentralized trials are key to enabling remote participation, reducing travel and time burdens for the patients when they're going through difficult times in their situations. So how do we reduce burden of clinical trials for the patients? First, Lilly is emphasizing a patient-centric clinical design, focusing on minimizing disruptions to patients' lives. One way we are doing that is by looking at a trial visit and saying or looking and seeing what is the minimum time on site that patient needs to be there. Also, minimizing the visits that the patient need to be on site for the clinical trials. And part of the way we do that is by enabling decentralized trials and community-based events. Again, bringing the trial to the patient rather than the patient coming to us. And then, of course, we have the telehealth and mobile labs to simplify access to care and trial participation. All of these efforts are together will help remove barriers and make trials more inclusive for patients and give them access to innovative drugs. So my role at Lilly as a senior director in clinical lab sciences is to oversee the testing of all the samples we collect in these trials. And one of the key innovations that is helping us get to patients is microsampling. As you likely know, microsampling allows patients to collect bloods in settings that are not necessarily the clinic. It can enable home collection or remote collection, such as a community-based event. These devices take minimal amounts of blood and give us a lot of data for these clinical trials. And additionally, these devices are often less painful than traditional venous sampling. And this is especially true for when using these devices in children. And again, these trials support these devices support decentralized trial, increasing access, and can help us include a diverse population. So one of the first ways that Lilly implemented microsampling was for pediatric trials. And the primary driver of that was the fact that, these smaller patients we have limited access to blood for analysis. And oftentimes PK sampling would be left out of the equation. Once we enabled microsampling for these pediatric trials, we were able to get better PK profiles. And as an added bonus, as I mentioned before, these devices are less painful. So, it's less intrusive on a pediatric patient. And additionally, this allowed for these patients to get these samples taken at home in a more comfortable environment, as opposed to, getting the patient out to the clinic in a weird environment for that pediatric patient, and then driving home. Again, if when done at home, in the home setting, there's a lot less time spent traveling to and fro and waiting in a doctor's office. So as me and my team started enabling these microsampling into clinical trials on a broader than pediatric basis, we found that teams were coming to us very late in the planning process for phase 3. And then we did a holistic review and tried to determine the best point at which we should start developing microsampling for these trials. And it was determined that the earlier the better. And the best time to start working on microsampling validations was even before we were in the clinic. Because for all these, we would have to have validations done, and including microsampling in the validation as the initial validation minimized time and effort by our partners and allowed us to get microsampling into the clinic a lot faster. As such, we developed this 3-step paradigm that I've highlighted here. First and foremost, as our programs come out of development and we're starting to look at first-in-man studies, we have to triage the programs, because not every program is going to be amenable to microsampling for various reasons. One of the reasons might be the patient population is not appropriate for microsampling. Another reason would be, maybe you have an active metabolite that you have to track, and that's going to require extra volumes or extra sampling to track those. And then, Another thing that we have to triage after that is the PK profile expected to be amenable to home collection. So all of these things go into our triage paradigm. And then as we go through these, we present these to the teams, get buy-in from them. And then as they move into the phase 1 study, the first-in-man studies, we add a concordance arm. And this concordance arm is to ensure that what we're seeing in venous blood is what it is being mimicked in capillary blood. And then once we show that concordance, we can enable these in phase 2 and then beyond. And this is the key. That phase 2 and beyond is where the patient is involved, and this will allow for the patients to have access to these innovative drugs, spend less time traveling to and from the clinic, less time in the office, and it makes their lives better as well as gets them the drugs that they need for their disease. So overall, we're at Lilly, we're trying to reach underserved patients. We're using innovative approaches such as decentralized trials, mobile labs, and community-based screening events that reach out to the underserved population, and it helps expand our reach. We're keen on enabling new technology and technology such as telehealth platforms, these microsampling devices, and remote participation in clinical labs or clinical trials. Microsampling as an innovation is key in allowing these patients to visit the clinical site less frequently, free up time to spend with their loved ones, and make the clinical trial more pleasant. As they're in the clinical trial because they have a disease or something wrong with them, so their lives are already inconvenienced enough. So what we can do is try and minimize any extra burden these clinical trials would have. And again, a lot of our trials, the vast majority of the trials recently run by Lilly have the elements of patient-centric design and enable community-based research so that we can include more people and make the trials less burdensome on them, both time and effort. So together, Lilly's transforming clinical research, broadening access, improving patient-based experience, and ensuring that innovative treatments reach those who need them the most. Thank you. On to you, Gerald.
Great, thanks, Bill. Thanks for the introduction. I'm thrilled to be here to be presenting today. I want to say, Carissa set the stage, for the problem that we're all faced with, and I think we're all well aware, of all of us trying to solve this. And I'm just thrilled, like Bill, in what he presented, talks about the solutions. Lilly leading the way in trying to solve the problems of what we're looking at in clinical trials. And I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about expanding upon the solutions that like Lilly's putting in place, again, leading the way, and what the industry is doing. And hopefully give a new insight, again, of really getting into the specifics of how do we expand zip codes. So to start, what I'd like to do is actually run a poll. Neil, if you could bring up the poll, I'd love it because it leads into my presentation.
It's live, Gerald.
Thank you. And can you post? I don't see the results coming up.
If you go into your interactions tab on the top right, you'll be able to see it.
Thank you. We must have a lot of healthy individuals attending the session. Don't be shy. Enter your poll. Thank you. So it's interesting in looking at the poll, and again, thanks, Bill, for jumping on and showing me where that is. It's like when I think about going for medications, and I'm going to talk about, again, the idea of like bringing in the pharmacies. Like I don't go to the pharmacy for medications. I'm going to knock on wood that I, don't have prescriptions, but I'm in there. I always tell everybody I'm in here once a week to pick up my Dove chocolate. So I get to see my pharmacist pretty much weekly, just checking in. So thank you for the poll, for people answering the poll. So what I'd like to do now is jump into this topic about pharmacy, and to bring to everybody's attention that, do you realize that after clinical research, after we've done the work, whether it's even with the microsampling, drugs in particular, that every community pharmacy is the launch pad for tomorrow's cures, right? That the first thing we do once a drug is approved is to get it into pharmacies to dispense. And some of the things what we looked at is say, well, let's start taking a look at that and what we can do by bringing that launch pad earlier into the clinical trial process. And that's where I'm going to go today. And specifically, I want to talk about the 20,000 local independent pharmacies. And that's going to be really where I focus, but I will talk about pharmacy in general. And to bring into mind that in the pharmacies of the independent pharmacies, which are located throughout the US, and again, this is in the US, that has access to like 80,000 potential patients, 80 million potential patients, with about 4,000 patients in a pharmacy's database on average in the local community stores. And when I look at this also, but please, like, again, with all of us, like we're most in the world, like we look at, outside the US, my focus again is going to be in US, but outside the US, the practice of pharmacy is the same. In Europe, actually, there's many more independent community stores. It's only really like in the UK where they have chains or the retail pharmacies like in the US. But most of the outside the US follows the independent community model, which and of course the practice of pharmacy is the same worldwide through the FIP programs and the issues that come up. And in specifically, when I talk about the independent community pharmacies, I want to share with you like a nuance that I want to make sure you take home from this. And that is, when I talk about the independent pharmacies, I want to start talking about the pharmacist and versus the pharmacy when I start talking about numbers and relationships and about trust. Carissa mentioned trust, and I know Bill and Lilly's definitely building community trust. And this is the key element that we believe here at RxE2 that is critical to the success of finding solutions. So the community pharmacy, like let's get real about it. There are approximately 20,000 community pharmacies, independently owned community pharmacies throughout the U.S., and especially in the regions that Carissa talked about in the southeast, where they are the primary point of care for most people. I do want to point out that, of course, that Walgreens and CVS each have about 9,000 stores. Walmart has 5,000 Kroger's stores. So there are like 100,000 pharmacies in different venues, the retail setting, the grocery store setting, and of course at hospitals, et cetera. But I want to just focus really in on the independent community pharmacy where there's about 20,000 and really get into the numbers. So when I talk about here about 2,000 patients, so if I said 80 million, 2,000 patients are active, which means there are 40 million active patients we have access through by using community pharmacists. And like I mentioned, in the urban and community setting for sure. And getting back to that, the patient-pharmacist trusted relationship. And I think we need to do more, and you'll hear me talking about this as we move, in general, start talking about what I call a trust unit. It's time we start measuring it. What is trust? I know that doctors, pharmacists, nurses are always top 5 in trust, but then I start thinking about loyalty. So as we mentioned, even in the polls, you see your pharmacist, well, in this case, some, only a few, like multiple, but most patients either go into the pharmacies, 12 to 20 times a year. And so there's a loyalty factor that's got to be brought into the trust factor. So you see your doctor twice a year, probably the nurse, maybe more unless it's assisted living, but also then your pharmacist, there's a loyalty factor of seeing your pharmacist 20 times a year. And that's critical, I think, into what we're trying to do. And in addition to that, one I want to bring out is what community pharmacies are already doing. The medication adherence programs, that's working with the local Medicaid to reduce healthcare costs and improve patient outcomes. And believe it or not, your fellow workers in your industry, right, in the pharma industry, on the commercial side are already working with the independent community pharmacies, but I think it's time in clinical operations, that we bring pharmacies into play as well. Everybody knows about the vaccinations, and of course, not everyone really understands about the medication therapy management or the patient care plans, where pharmacists are integrate or play an integral role in taking patients in like from 15 medications down to 8 and making sure that there's adherence and compliance with those medications through like their programs, again, patient care programs that they run to synchronize the medication. And of course, then again, as we talk about microsampling, et cetera, they're already doing point of care testing. So how do we look at this? So for here at RxE2, one of the key things that I need to talk about is how do we bring all these independent pharmacies all across the US together as one? And of course, it's with technology, and especially enabling it with AI. But of course, there has to be that trust that's built into it so that the pharmacies and the work that they do, and I'll talk more about that, is then followed, like from the sponsor's point of view, really focused on regulatory and the trusting us. And so when I think about it, like, you know, the ideas behind like Walmart, Walgreens, and CVS, if you think about it, they have that technology that brings all their stores in uniform. And so what we're doing, like, again, at RxE2 is to have a technology that's going to be paramount to use in these models about bringing all the independent community pharmacies together to work as a collective, like I said, as a collective whole, to bring in those patients and populations that Carissa mentioned, the underserved. And of course, we all talk about like diverse, underrepresented, underserved communities. And I think it's important, again, working with these pharmacies, that through technology, again, we could have standardization. We can have, you know, the standardization of the GCP, the SOPs, the training, the questionnaires through IRB, and all of that, of course, is how that you can get pharmacy to pharmacy served as like a Walgreens or a Walmart or a CVS did in clinical trials. And of course, when I think about the, again, the sponsors, we've already talked, Bill's already mentioned some of the things that partnering, what they're achieving, and Lilly's well in the way in this process, you know, of getting involved in the communities, especially with the community access. And that's where I talk about the community pharmacies already in the community. So there's 3 aspects I want to look at, and we'll go through this kind of quickly, but it just, when I think about it, we call it like community access, community dispensing, and site services. Really, when you think about it, it's recruitment, clinical supplies, and the clinical site. And so I want to focus on first is community access, and that and the importance of saying this underrepresented areas, or that I want to say that the population that we're reaching through the independent community that we've found through the many patients we're already working with are all clinical trial naive. So it's achieving through this model, achieving what we're trying to get, like again, Carissa mentioned, is access to those individuals who haven't participated in clinical trials before. Now, they're a little bit more difficult patient in the fact that they don't understand about informed consents. They've never heard about it before. They haven't heard about like going to the clinical site or coming to the pharmacy, you know, to do blood work, et cetera. But imagine like if we go further about like what Bill talked about with microsampling and testing to make it easier and easier for the patient and reduce their burden, it's going to get easier and easier to get into the community. And so just briefly, I want to give you an example of like this community access that we do when we think about the awareness campaigns. I mean, and please don't worry about the details of this. I just want to put like, there's things that we're doing in that consistently can grow across thousands of pharmacies at one time about like the study awareness cards, study brochures, you know, we'll talk like bag stuffers, point of sale, the social media awareness. But the key in working with the community pharmacies, right, is getting back to the pharmacist. There's a lot of companies that like the community awareness and where Lilly is going and going even further about being in the community. But what happens when like the fair's over or the day's over and you did a community awareness campaign, and then what? In our model, there's the keeping patients warm. So when a patient comes to like a community awareness event or they get this flyer, the next day they're in the pharmacy again. Again, if you're coming in on average, if you're coming in 10, 20 times a year to the pharmacist, many times, like even in some of the recruitment campaigns we're looking at, the patient comes in the pharmacy the next day and tells us what's going on. And it's very important, again, that that's captured and we learn and move on. So I just say that's just one example of the access, of getting access to patients and the things that we do. And most importantly, it's the role the pharmacist plays in these access to the community. The next thing I want to just talk about is the dispensing of the medication, which is, again, the clinical supplies, and really look at this from a model thinking about even from the med devices, the clinical supplies, other supplies needed to conduct clinical trials. And when I think about it too, is like a lot of things like devices and stuff like that, once they're approved, where patients go to get their answers and find out like the batteries need to be replaced? It's the pharmacist, the local community pharmacist come in and say, listen, my diabetes device isn't working. What do I do? And so we're always giving advice and helping patients, with devices and kits, et cetera. Even the Colovar, that comes out there coming into the pharmacy saying, how am I supposed to do this? So what I'd like to do is just briefly talk about this community dispensing. And we could talk about, again, the reducing of the waste, the timelines, improved flexibility, and improved compliance. But there are a couple of key things I want to bring out. And that is, my expertise is in clinical supplies. And I think about like the way we've done clinical supplies over the past 40 years. I think we need to start changing that and start thinking about having the end game in mind. And that is, how do we deliver supplies now in the clinical trials versus where it needs to go? And I think about, again, if we start bringing in community pharmacies, then we're going to start seeing models that we kind of know. In this like schematic that I've done, we are all familiar with the packaging, labeling, warehouse, distribution to the site. And that's a process that's used, and to note that there's a pharmacy at that site that has to dispense. But we're also starting to now recognize, like the direct-to-patient decentralized, that the need for a central pharmacy through the courier services to also get supplies to the patient. And everybody's pretty familiar with that, except the costs for that method is pretty cost prohibitive. And so we need to really take a look at that. And when I think about working with the pharmacies, we can take this further using the central pharmacy to really start taking a look at the way it's done commercially. And then I think about that, yes, this can all be done through central pharmacy, which again is their direct-to-patient model. But I'd like to think too is that when we go further, that just eliminate that first step of packaging and labeling, because that's done so that the site knows how to dispense. Because even at the site, by state law, they have to put a patient label, by state law regulations, a patient label on that medication. So the need is say, let's just go right to the pharmacies in a distribution hub and then dispense directly to the patient who are coming into the pharmacies, the sites that I'll get to in a minute, or even the local that can go out to like 50 to 100 miles very inexpensively, and of course, full, the last mile fully tracked, from the regulatory and handling and chain of custody. So then the last thing I want to talk about is, again, thinking where all of us, to go back, is to start thinking about pharmacies as sites. And this is where I'm very, very excited about how we've gotten here. So when I think about DCT, and everybody knows about that, it's really taken to the next level. And I like to think about the decentralized gave us the reach. And now if we start using the community pharmacies, it actually brings the depth. And I'm going to talk about a hub and spoke model that then starts taking a real look at how to decrease the cost, how to increase flexibility, how to make it more efficient. And of course, then the benefits derived from that really start taking a look about the local access that we've all trying to achieve. The idea of higher adherence and through patient burden gets reduced. As again, it's the local access, the pharmacist interacting with the patient locally, where they're already talking to the pharmacist about their medications. The idea of getting real world information from the patient in their setting. So when I think about the DCT gave us through telehealth, right, really made that a standard now that, the idea from the regulatory point of view is done. The hub and spoke model that I'll talk about, which is like where Walgreens is going, that they're doing this hub and spoke model. RxC2, we're doing this hub and spoke model, and I believe it's the way, most of the way pharmacies are going to get involved is to do this hub and spoke model. And just briefly to take a look at what does that mean. So what we've done is we find like a pharmacy in a community that is already set up to be a clinical site where they already have exam rooms, they already have nurses that are coming in, seeing patients, like assisting with Medicare programs or pharma companies on the commercial side. But the idea here is it's very unique is that pharmacies, the independent stores, already have a network of helping each other out. If even in locally, some of the pharmacies have 3 or 4 pharmacies in a community that are all owned by the single pharmacist. So the idea with the hub and spoke pharmacy is that not all pharmacies can handle or become a clinical site, but they all have patients that can be referred to the pharmacy. And they'll do this because that pharmacy is not going to cannibalize that patient. They'll still go back to the local pharmacist for information, of course, for their prescriptions, but there's no cannibalization. And I want to say this is already being done through supporting of delivering of like patient home delivery, the idea of medication. You need a medication today, so you call your local community, another pharmacy in the community that you know the pharmacist and owner, and you get medication to make sure the patient's needs are met. So there's a lot of capabilities in this hub and spoke model that get me very excited about where this can go. And just briefly, the idea is this: in the brick and mortar site, a clinical site has 30 patients they might be out of that they think would be eligible for a clinical trial. After that, it's a patient, and the next patient might come into the clinic. And of course, then social media. And we all know about the recruitment through social media. In our pharmacy model, if you talk about a specific pharmacy, it's about the same thing. In an asthma trial, we took a look at this, and in a community site, we have a potential made for 159 patients at that one store, right? That could be available for this, possibly be available for this clinical trial with the demographics highlighted. But if we do a hub and spoke model, that goes out to the number of pharmacies. We can have up to 50 pharmacies within a 35-mile radius. That makes it convenient, again, for patients that would actually travel that distance to come into that hub pharmacy to actually do the clinical trial versus going much further distance into a academic institution and the patient burden that goes along with that. And then we greatly expand, again, into the communities and into those urban areas of unreached patient potential into getting into clinical trials. And then, of course, that just, and I don't need to go into this in detail, it really is like the third bullet point. It really is about the trust, leveraging existing relationships. And I want to say, like, you think about this, these are relationships that have been in place for 5, 10, 15 years. I know pharmacists, again, in one of the community pharmacists I worked with, the pharmacist knew the parent as when they were children, now that's parents, and then as their children are going through. So it's in the community, it's a staple within the community. And of course, like in everything we're trying to achieve, gets us to, again, like what Carissa talked about, is access to those underrepresented populations. So again, just in summary, I just really thinking about just some key bullet points with this concept of bringing community pharmacies, independent community stores into the fold. I think about, like with the DCT trials, maximizing PI capabilities, that a PI through like the health medicine can be dealing with multiple pharmacies with one central pharmacy, but expanding the reach of that PI. And even talking about like in New York City, we have multiple sites. We have one in Staten Island, one in the Bronx, and one in Brooklyn. And so PI, like even to go between those and working to actually visit, again, there's an idea that we can make centralized, the decentralized model. And I think about the quality, that's always the first thing that everybody talks about, the regulations. The key is that pharmacies are already licensed in this vertical. We absolutely understand about licensure and dispensing a medication that you don't have to, right? They're dispensing according to state laws, especially for the medication. And that to understand that all pharmacies are statewide, every pharmacy goes through quality programs for Medicare and Medicaid, that like quality programs are not something new. It's just an addition to. And so when you start talking about, like, again, doing GCP and training and stuff, they already do this and know this. On the other side, of course, looking at the community access, it's a key factor. And of course, when I think about logistics of about IP storage and monitoring in a different way of how to reduce those costs of like the direct to patient that blows budgets out of the water versus keeping each pharmacy with a supply that can feed multiple, a greater population to local delivery service. Anyhow, so thank you for listening. And I want to say this is just the beginning of what we've learned today. So thank you very much. I think now we'll go to questions.
Yes, thank you, Gerald, and thank you, Carissa and Bill as well. If we can invite Carissa and Bill back to the stage. Hi there. Hi.
Hi.
Really interesting talks. Thank you. I think it's really timely and important what you were talking about. This kind of democratization of clinical trials, just enabling us to include, using these techniques to include more people into clinical trials. So just going to hand over to questions now. So for everyone watching this, if you can submit your questions through the chat function, we've already got a couple in there, I see. So the first question is from Lars. I think it's aimed at Bill, but anyone that fancies taking this is more than welcome to answer. Are analytical labs and other ancillary players, technologies and processes mature and readily available to partner with, for example, microsampling? So yeah, are the labs ready to deal with these microsamples?
So I definitely believe we do have, Lilly uses a variety of labs, not just one lab, to do our analysis. And, we're even doing analysis in large molecules. So where you would normally do like an ELISA, we're able to implement this sample collection and getting really good R-squared values for it. So I really do believe we're ready to do this. Again, the key point is it's not going to be ideal for every situation, right? If you're going to need large volumes because you have a very, very low limit of quantification that you need, or you're following metabolites as well as the parent, those will be situations where you might want to shy away from it. And by doing our triage, we definitely go from 20 programs a year down to 3 that are possibly enabled for microsampling. But the labs we work with are all excellent, and we do the validation is as good as the regular venous blood validation.
I think. Go on, Carissa, sorry.
I was just going to add something. I think there are some CROs that are more skilled at this than others because they've actually put in the time and the investment in microsampling, especially in bioanalysis, regulated bioanalysis. And those would be CROs like Alta Sciences. They do an amazing job. But I would also like to add, being a part of other microsampling committees and sitting in a lot of talks, the FDA is actually on board. It's not really an FDA question. I think it's more the community itself, because what we hear is there's still a lot of key opinion leaders that are not sure about microsampling or sort of maybe oppose microsampling. So I think there is a shift in thinking, and that's what we're in the middle of now. But I think the good part of this is the labs are open-minded, and a lot of labs are doing great work. And then we also have the FDA supporting this, both in liquid and dried microsampling. So I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, thank you, Carissa. And just an observation from me as well in answer to this, and something that Lilly have been doing, Bill, is you've had publications both about patient satisfaction with microsampling and carer satisfaction, but also some demonstration that going beyond the PK bioanalysis, that moving into the clinical chemistry endpoints, the liver panels and things like that, you're demonstrating that labs are able to deal with these samples for those kinds of analysis and getting comparable data for those as well. It was a really good publication a couple of years ago, I know, that came out to Lilly. Don't know whether you want to comment on that at all, Bill.
Yeah, so we're definitely looking at ClinChem to expand microsampling into. We've actually used it at some of the remote screening events that we've had. We definitely have a suite of labs that we can use that on. We have validations for. Um, so I do think, again, it's not the panacea. It is a good tool. Sometimes we do have to have patients in the clinic. For example, all for first-in-man studies, they're going to have to be, just for the safety concerns, they're going to have to be in the clinic. It is a tool in our deck. We should use it when appropriate and don't try and kind of shoehorn it in.
Yeah.
If you're already taking ADA samples, which can be 4-8 milliliters, it's actually more onerous to add the microsample onto that rather than just take another mill of whole blood and spin it down for plasma.
I think that's a really good observation, Bill. Got a next question. This one's for you, Bill, from Lee. Are you looking to expand microsampling efforts, and what are the outstanding challenges?
So we're definitely looking for opportunities to use microsampling. Again, from a PK perspective, that's my main focus. So we're looking basically at all the programs that come through Lilly and figuring out what molecules are the best ones to run. And that list gets whittled down pretty quickly. I think some of the things that are challenging is convincing teams to add an arm to their first-in-man study to get the concordance, finding the right patient population, because there's actually some patient populations that not only need to come into the clinic, they want to come into the clinic. Getting into the clinic makes them feel, just getting into the clinic makes them feel better, hence the placebo effect for some programs. So, technology is moving there. I think there are quite a number of them. They seem to most of them seem to be finger prick. I know Carissa's has an innovative, or she's actually brought to me innovative technology with the capitainer. So and that's what Lilly's approach is. If it's out there, we'll evaluate it. We're not only going to be Mitra. We're not only going to be whatever device is hot at the moment. We want to assign the right device for the right population and then move forward from there. Because really, we just want to get innovative drugs to people who need them.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I think this next question is probably aimed for you, Lars. Are there concerns with pharmacies' workload, staff ability to manage, e.g. diverse protocol and study requirements, assuming this model would be used by various pharma companies? I have seen such concerns for regular sites. So yeah, workload and staff ability of using pharmacies.
Yeah, that's of course it's correct when you think about it, and it depends on the pharmacy of where they are and what's going on. But for many of the pharmacies, that we, as we analyze or look, not analyze, as we look to onboard a pharmacy about their capabilities, is that they do have the ability to expand it. And the key part of this is that they're already doing clinical work. So if you're trying to then take a pharmacist out from behind the counter and have them as an so do all your 300 dispensings a day and do this clinical work, that's not the pharmacy that should be started. It's the pharmacy where they already have the other pharmacists doing clinical work as well as filling prescriptions. So of course, like all of us, there's no one's ever sitting idle, right? But it really is like which stores are already realizing they have to make the time to get into this new revenue source. But every pharmacy we talk to that get into this, and they're pharmacies, community pharmacists are very, very excited about this. We've had to do no marketing, and we have thousands of pharmacies who signed up to do this. The key for them is that they can deliver a new service for their patients. That's the first thing they say. We have an opportunity now for our patients that we didn't have before. And then to get much more involved with them. Again, so it is a balance, but that's no different than trying to get into a clinic, open a new clinic, find staffing. Like some of the models where they tried to open new clinics and then staff them, couldn't get any staffing. So yes, it is a concern, but the independent stores, they know they have to do more clinical work because the prescription, again, they know that is coming to an end, the dispensing of medications to meet their revenue needs. So great question, and it's a balance.
Thank you, Gerald. Anyone else got a comment on that at all? So I have another question for you, Gerald. Just, are there any concerns about regulatory issues with this kind of work? For example, who might be the PI? What's the PI status within the pharmacy? Don't know whether you want to talk to that at all.
Yeah, I think, again, is whenever, I was at SCRS, and one of the things every time we talk about like the DCT, the regulatory side of this comes up, it always comes up, regulations. And I think, in the DCT model, one of the first things that came out, the understanding about telehealth is like the state laws of you got to be licensed in the state where the patient, right? You have to be licensed to do this. And so when I think about from the regulatory point of view, I get on my soapbox and I say, well, if you look at the definition of a PI, it actually meets the pharmacist better than it does the doctor. Versus like the ICH guideline says the pharmacist is just a pill counter, it's accountability. So it's a balance. And what I want to say to answer your question is where they are today is everybody needs to stay in the vertical, right? The pharmacist is licensed to do certain things about the dispensing and work with patients on the medication side. They cannot diagnose. So you have to have a doctor in there. You have to have the PI who's licensed in the state to diagnose and run the studies. I do not see our pharmacists as being PIs for a while. And they are serving as PIs for observational studies. And we've looked at that, we have, again, as like Bill said, it's not ideal for every situation. But you have to look at that and say, when is it the right situation? And Bill, when you said that, it just reminded me of the times that with your solutions, though, there's a new problem that comes up that's an answer for that you didn't have before. And so when I look at this, we come across these new problems and say, well, now we have another solution that might be a fit, but it isn't, like you said, Bill, it isn't for every situation. I hope that.
No, it's very interesting, Gerald. And we probably have time for one more question, and whoever wants to answer this, are there any particular patient populations that this approach, whether the pharmacist-based model or the patient-centric sampling model or both, are there any particular patient populations that this may be more suited to, and are there any patient populations that this might be less suited for?
So when you say more suited, immediately what comes to mind are people who maybe elderly people who live in, retirement homes who don't actually get out that much, right? So they can participate in a clinical trial and get just do the sampling on their own. But when you think about that, is even like parents who have to go to the baseball game, go to the soccer game, pick them up from this sport, take this kid to this, if we can make it easier for them to participate in a trial, treat their disease, and let them live their lives, I think that's probably an ideal situation.
Yeah. No.
I'd like to add to that, Bill, because that's paramount. We talk about patient burden, and that's the whole concept, right, of what we're trying to do. Again, Lilly taking, going to where the patients are with the mobile units, et cetera, and community awareness campaigns. I think about, again, the role of the pharmacist, and again, pharmacy versus pharmacist, the pharmacist, and the whole thing about go to the pharmacist role in COVID and vaccines, the hesitancy. The role of the pharmacist is not to tell the patient to do or not, but to give them the information for them to make a better informed decision. So I look at that same role about clinical trials, the mistrust of clinical trials. It's not to coerce or do anything like that. It's to educate and make more patients aware. So when you ask about like the population, who's it better for, it's hesitancy. And to point out that in communities, especially of underrepresented populations, rural, the pharmacies in that community and thriving because they are a member of the community, right? If you have to speak the language of the patients who are coming in, and we found that to be a problem that many times, like again, we say there's this language is spoken in the pharmacy that needs to be spoken to, because otherwise you don't exist in the community. And so this is one of those areas that, again, it's already taken care of in the community. So just to expand upon what Bill said, which is the primary.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and what's really good is I can hear the excitement in your voice coming through, Gerald and Bill. And Carissa. We're getting towards the end now. I just want to thank you, Carissa, Bill, and Gerald, for joining us today. Phil, how do I get the slides up on here again? Thank you, Phil. So I want to thank the audience as well for attending. And just a reminder that this was brought to you by the Patient-Centric Sampling Interest Group. If you scan on that QR code on the left, you can take a look at our website. On the right-hand side, you can join our LinkedIn group. And we have a lot of active groups. Our community relies on people putting up their hand and getting involved in our activities that will hopefully helping to educate people about these technologies and breaking down the barriers to their more everyday adoption. I'd like to just bring your attention to our next webinar, which is coming up in the new year. We've got a couple of excellent scientists from Alta Sciences. We've got Jeff and Marie Nguyen, who are going to be talking to us about some of the workflow advances in the bioanalytical side of things and some of the other parts of the workflow. So really excited and looking forward to that. And I'd finally like to just thank all of our sponsors again for enabling these webinars to happen. And again, thanking Carissa, Gerald, and Bill for a really wonderful webinar. And thank you all in the audience.